Okay, hi everybody. Welcome back to the Everything Design Show podcast. Today we have Mr. Jason Pang, who was originally from Malaysia, and then he did his master's together with me in Australia at Swinburne University of Technology, and he's been working in Thailand, for the past few years. So I think it's a very unique journey that he's taken. Coming from as a neighbor, being in Singapore, having my Malaysian neighbor, going to Australia, and now he's in Thailand. So I thought it'd be great to sort of get him to share about his journey as a UX UI designer, and also he does business consulting as well. He also does design thinking for his company internally and as well with clients as well. So he does a lot of different things, and hopefully today we'll be able to listen to him and learn from him in terms of what he's been doing for the past few years, and I think also in terms of his journey, I think from an international perspective, right, especially. So yeah, hi Jason, how are you?
Hey Nick, I am well, absolutely stoked to be involved in this podcast. So thank you for having me, and also hi to your guests as well,
Yes.
and your audience.
Yes, hi everybody. Make sure you go and find Jason on LinkedIn. I'll have the links in the description. All right. Yeah. So yeah, Jason. So how has life in Thailand been so far? I mean, what have you been? Has the pandemic been affecting you quite a lot, or not so much?
Well, I think personally it isn't too much. It's just that because the nature of my work has sort of sit around the sphere of digital, and it has been sort of such a trend where people started to work remotely. So I guess for me the transition from work perspective is a lot more easier as compared to those who are not exposed to working in the digital environment. But yeah, personally as well, I think it's great because I get to spend time with family a lot more closer, staying home. But yeah, I think in general, if I were to speak about Thailand or Bangkok, a lot of industries have been hit quite severely as well. And I think a lot of businesses eventually ended up closing, a lot of jobs being cut out, so those who are in the digital industry eventually sort of survive through. But at least now, seeing that it's been 2 months now, things have started to sort of come back to normal. So it wasn't eventually that bad to put into place.
Yeah, I mean, Thailand is a huge tourist destination, right? I mean, we have
Yes, it
thousands of
is. Yeah.
Singaporeans annually will go over to Thailand. So I'm sure, not having us go over to Singaporeans go up to Thailand to shop at the Chat to Chat, I'm sure that, makes a very, very big difference in terms of the market as well. I mean, Singapore also is a, big tourist destination. So, that also has been hit. So, but for yourself, I mean, working in the digital, in the digital realm, in the digital sphere, did you feel that past few months there were a little bit more inquiries for some of the services that your company was offering? Did you feel that was a little that increased a little bit more, or was that something that it just stayed status quo through the pandemic?
Yeah, oh, it's a great question actually, Nick. I think also partly because I'm now involved in the financial services industry as well as touching a little bit on insurance as well. Um, it is uh, it is a very demanding sort of service sort of touch points, for every single part of the work that we do, from consulting to providing design services, technical implementation, and so forth, business advisory. But I think one very key thing that we sort of transition as for my company and the company that I work for, is the fact that we are able to sort of sit into remote work, whereby we do remote kind of whiteboarding sessions, and really put in place some of the things that we both learned in the past back in Swinburne, with all the design thinking methods, and really just seeing how all these tools and methods come in hand right now. And certainly, personally as well, I wouldn't have seen COVID-19 to really become the catalyst for all this to unfold. So it really is sort of inspiring to our clients as well, and also within our working group. So I think to sort of sum it up, design thinking is also starting to make a buzz, if we all know about it, particularly in Southeast Asia. I mean, given in Australia and in US and some parts of other countries as well in the Western world, we see design thinking has been, in its own maturity. But yes, we do acknowledge and we do recognize that the client is actually starting to appreciate um, collaboration within the online space, being remote working or being remote whiteboarding session and brainstorming, really.
Yeah. No, so I mean, with the clients that you're working with, and it's very good to hear that your clients are very, I would say, hands on, right? With the digital platforms. I think
Yeah.
the assumption that I always would have, and with the engagement with some businesses, sometimes it's a bit of a barrier to sort of a barrier when it comes to the digital platforms, and even we are talking about these collaborative tools, whether you use Miro or Jamboard if it's free. There are quite a few tools out there. But I think it's heartwarming to know that in from the businesses that you've been engaging with, that they're quite accepting and they're open to try out these different things. And yeah, design thinking has been something that has been I think around. I mean, even when we were studying, and this was maybe about 8 years ago, right? When we were doing the masters, right?
Yeah, more or less around that
Yeah,
time.
somewhere
Yeah.
around that time, and in the classrooms, it was something that we heard about, right? Sort of around, like, or some class, or some, we'll read about it online, and about what's happening in the US, and 8 years ago, I
Yeah.
think the Australia sort of was starting to pick it up a little bit more.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to sort of see, like, the moving the whole movement in that sense, right? Design or UX, experience design, service design, sort of moving from up from Europe, America, down to Australia, and then coming into Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, but I guess with regards to what you were talking about with that movement, do you sort of, I mean, in Thailand, are you seeing now that a lot of people are utilizing the terminology of design thinking purely, or do you see that there is actually there are quite a few different perspectives in terms of the terminology that they use. Like, some people are using UX or experience design or service design in the Thai market. Is there a great diversity in that, or do most people sort of have a very clear idea?
Yeah, I think over the years, if I were to look back 8 to 10 years ago, design thinking, it's probably well known for its method for solving problems. And really, just to not jump into much of the detail, I think wouldn't be able to speak on behalf of other practices in other countries. But I think what I've observed in Bangkok specifically is that it is a very great term for transformation process in the way how we allow organizations to really solve problems, identify problems at different levels of an organization, being business process issues, or even about supply chain, management, all the way down to doing design thinking as a whole to improve customer experience and also user experience. So that itself hasn't been as complete as a whole tool to be implemented as what we did back in service design, where you have a proper discovery phase that you need to sort of sit into, then you move into the ideation and all the way to implementation. What's different, I think, with Thailand right now is that because businesses are always moving fast and things are always changing, requirements and etc. So in order for the need for design thinking to have its own say and sit on the table, it's important, I think, for me as a practitioner and for many as well who work alongside with me to really understand at what point of the project or the things that we're doing, we sort of extract the different tools and the methods that will really sit into the project, to serve the need or to serve the problem. Say, for example, if one organization that we used to work with had a lot of disagreements, say, in their decision making, and I think before even jumping into getting people on board the project, we use a very basic design thinking method to really help each other to empathize for one another and really sit down, really write down in simple post-it notes and just really post it on the walls and say, okay, what are the struggles that my department is facing, and what are yours? So really, as that tool itself sort of gather everyone together and really have a mutual understanding of what serves the business the most, rather than having a personal agenda into doing what you fit best. So I guess that has sort of been very helpful for me personally, and also the team that I work with here in utilizing design thinking. And of course, speaking of which, we do have workshops for designers and also non-designers who would really be interested in utilizing design thinking in their day-to-day or their projects.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think the point that you made about, I think, bringing value to the business, right? I think, at the end of the day, businesses come to you as a consultant or come to design agencies. We always have to make sure that, we're not just, trying to promote design thinking per se, or just to sell the name of UX and things like that. Ultimately, for your business for the business to run and to build continuous, bring in more customers. In that sense, it needs to help the business, earn more money. At the end of the day, whether it's in a direct way or a secondary way, right? So I think I do agree with the point that you made about, we do sometimes have to make sure that is done at the core, and the other things that we're talking about, the definitions of things. Because from the Singaporean market, from what I've seen, because I've only been back in Singapore for about 4 years, somewhere around there, about 4 years, so not too long, right? But just based on my observations in Singapore, I sort of see that there are a lot of different schools of thought, like, this design thinking for this, and it's and so like from a methodological perspective, they come in and then they apply in different ways. Like, one is just for training, one is for problem solving, then from UX, and then there's digital transformation, then there's the IT side that comes in, right? Then agile, scrum, and so on and so forth. So many different ones that are coming. Then those that are coming from a manufacturing process as well, they're trying to expand their market as well. So they come in and then, let's use lean, kaizen, blah blah, and so on and so forth. So the many different, I've just realized that the more I learn about it is, like, if I just came in with just design thinking as a sort of very narrow tool, I miss out on a lot of things that are being discussed, like a lot of different methodologies, a lot of different techniques, and I'm sure as a consultant, that's also going to be the goal, right? To say that, it's not just you, the client, using one tool, but it's understanding that there are many different tools, and the
That's
design
right.
thinking is just one aspect, which I do agree with the point you made, that needs to be, I think, the core of it. And I think it's hard. I think for Singapore, we are seeing that I don't know whether it's that where everybody's trying to be unique, or everybody's just trying to sell their own thing. But I'm also trying to there is a challenge that sometimes when I see companies, or I see some case studies, like this is purely from a case studies perspective, because I don't work purely with a company per se, but just from the case studies, the examples that I've seen, it sometimes does become sort of a selling of the methodology or the ideology or the framework, rather than sort of showing actually what are some of the I guess the positive impacts, not just the positive outcome, but I think the positive impacts. Like you talk about, I think, like the design thinking tool that you use, which is about building empathy, right? For each of the stakeholders, and I think that's a very, very positive impact that you
I
added?
agree with you,
Yeah.
Nick. Actually, to touch on a little bit more, since I think this podcast is probably going to be a lot more meaningful for many other design thinking practitioners or UX designers or CX people. I think one of the biggest challenge for our team and also for the company, or even the organizations or the different clients that I work with, it's really to really boil down into how big and how small is design thinking. Because like you've said, I'll probably say it's probably the same between Thailand or Singapore, sharing the same commonality whereby people are selling that terminology. But in fact, the scope itself is actually very heavy. And what we actually try to do a little bit more different is really help scope down the work as a proof of concept. And rather than going like a large scale project, it's just to make sure that people are a lot more confident, as they invest in and as they learn about design thinking. And it's actually proven to be working quite well. And I know different companies, different designers would have a different approach in doing that. But I think for us personally, I think it does work quite well, given that there's a series of milestones that we have sort of set and agreed that we would walk this journey together with the client. I think at the heart of it, it's all about being empathic and really seek to understand the core of the business and what are the problems that really sit under that, rather than designing and really catering solutions for the end journey. But it all started with the beginning of it all.
Yeah, no, and I think the what I think just to touch on that. I mean, recently there was this it was just I think it was a Fast Factory article that came out, right? I think I posted it on Facebook about how this Harvard professor is talking about how now it's there's a value of being a generalist, right? I think we still have you still need specialists, right? I mean, from in a medical sense or a technology sense, but I think when it comes to business problems, right? Like, is your MBA enough, right? Is your design thinking course enough? Not necessarily, because like we spoke about, there's so many different tools that are out there, right? And I think one thing that I think the point that you really made, which is very, very accurate, which I don't think many businesses or even practitioners do enough. I'm sure they know about it, but the scope thing, like when we try and solve problems, we don't just try and solve. It's very hard to solve everything, right? So sometimes when I hear some students tell me, "Oh, Nicholas, I want to do this application. This application is going to solve A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right?" And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. But if your application can solve A, B, C, D, E, F, G, then and you have a budget of millions of dollars, then yeah, sure, roll it out. But a lot of companies don't have millions of dollars, for them to come and pay a consultancy company. I would imagine we're in the range of maybe $30,000-$40,000 depending on the scope of the project and so on and so forth. And I think scope is actually very important, because sometimes you may be solving a very small thing, or your innovation in that sense, or your outcome may be something that's very small, but actually there are secondary or tertiary effects to that, which I think this whole idea of scope is something that needs to be looked at, definitely. I mean, so yeah, I mean, just going back to that point, I mean, now also, when we're looking at education, right? What do we train for as designers, right? Which I will go and ask. I'll ask you this very soon. But I think the point of training the designers is, do we sort of see designers now, being abroad, looking at things from a macro perspective, or just micro and so on and so forth, and then looking at it from a big picture and things like that, right? So I guess I mean, we moving forward to the next point, I think the being able to look at it from a big picture, looking at being able to scope in terms of different specific things, that's definitely a good point we need to look at. But yeah, I think since we touched on that, going on to education, inflection point, right? I mean, now that you've been working for a few years, I mean, what, 7 years already? I think you've been working
Yeah,
in UX
close to
UI.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
actually
seven
around that.
years
Yeah.
UX UI. And for those who I mean, yeah, for those who don't know Jason, Jason been has had a long history and experience with web, with digital design, digital platforms. He may not have called himself a UX UI designer 6 or 7 years ago, or 7 or 8 years ago, but he definitely had the skills, like, based on them that time in the past. But yeah, I mean, the progression, I thought, I think from what I saw was that the realm and the shift and the changes. I think your grasp of the digital realm is much has always been much higher than mine, because I did come from a animation background, more graphics design background, a little bit more, so not so much on the digital side. But I guess okay, so moving on to the question. So the question I had actually for you was that, if you were to plan, let's say you were to start a school in Thailand, right? Let's say, and you thought that you wanted to come up with a UX course, or a design thinking UX course in Thailand. What do you feel are some of the lessons or some of the classes that you think will be useful, and that are not really taught in traditional design schools, just based on what we've seen in the past 8 years? Or I mean, in the past, when we were going to school, do you think that there are any modules that you would want to add into a curriculum, today, if you were to start your own design school, or you go into teach?
Yeah. I think just before I continue, Nick,
Yes,
I think
yes.
you're way too kind.
No.
Certainly not the maestro, but yeah, I think it's good to really sort of have this exchange going on. I think after so many years. Yeah, really, really good question, actually, Nick. And I think having to practice this for so long and really having different exposure and challenges across my career as well, with the people that I work with alongside for so many years, people come and go, and really boiling down into that question, I think, as much as how the methods are very important, I think the essence, in my view, right, different people has got different way of saying this, but I think I'll probably going to put observation as the key foundational course, partly because I think for me to really understand design thinking and of course the wider expression of that practice, ranging into service design, customer experience design, and even digital media and UX design, I think it all really sort of begin with observation. I probably am not the best sort of person to speak on behalf of design anthropologists. You probably have more ideas on that, but I think one of the key core values that we've learned in the past in this subject is really about showing empathy and really observe and really take time to really see things and really sort of paint pictures together. Often, in order for us to understand a problem, it doesn't just come from one lens. It sort of has to come from different perspective or lenses, where it's not about just people, it's not just about businesses. I think that sort of foundational value is very important. And truthfully as well, working with many great talented designers in Thailand, one of the things that I really thought about and really sort of put in a lot of emphasis is really, before jumping into certain concept work or solution, it's important for you to understand what are the problems, big or small. If you couldn't grasp hold of that problem, you will be defeated straight when you are seated in the table with business people. That conversation will never happen, or it will never progress if you're just keeping that upon the colors, upon the icons, upon any sort of visual aspect of things. And I really sort of challenged them, having a conversation with your client, having a conversation with the people that you work with, ask them about things, right? How do you feel about this? What's your day-to-day observation like? And really start putting in place some of the UX research techniques. I don't think there's a proper way to really say this, but Um, I think in the industry that is ever changing, it's very hard for us to just say, hey, you need to first sit in and just do a proper 2 week user research. And like you said before earlier on, right, it's agile. People are practicing agile now. So you gotta move fast, and you really adapt fast as well. And I think one of the ways where um, youngsters, young designers, students who aspire to become a designer or even to really go into this field, I think it is really important for them to understand the bigger picture, the problem that underlies in the project or the work that they wanted to go on, because ultimately it is your driver. If you're not setting that, then you probably wouldn't have that goal and objective being set in place to really drive you all the way to the end of the project, because you'll be burnt out definitely. I mean, it's just speaking from personal experience as well.
Yeah. I mean, this whole idea of observation, I mean, I think if anybody's been listening to the podcast that I've been doing, I think a lot of people do talk about that. And you know, in school, they can only we only teach you like, okay, observations, you can do it in this way, that way. You can do mapping exercises, right? You can maybe do
Yeah.
empathy maps, you can do the different tools. But I think what you're talking about also, it almost like it's almost a muscle, right? You know how to do a push-up, right? The basics of a push-up, right? So those are maybe the tools. But for you to be
Mm,
very good at doing push-ups, and maybe you can do 1,000 push-ups in one sitting. I don't know lah. Maybe some people. I'm sure some people can, right?
yeah.
That muscle sort of needs to be built, right? That muscle needs to be constantly trained. So when you go in, it's like, oh, I can see that business problem. I know what's happening. I observe very quickly. I don't think it take too long. So, yeah, which I think that's something that needs to be trained. Do you feel that, I mean, based on about this observation thing, do you feel that it's something that comes with age? Like you're talking about when working with the younger designers, do you think that it just takes time? You just have to keep doing it, and it just comes with age, as long as you're open to it. Do you sort of feel that way?
Yeah, I do think so, because I think probably part of the core development is about behavioral change. And I think as you learn, as you develop, um, we're always being brought up in a way to resolve problem in a very visible way, things that we can see, things that we can all observe, and really just putting into tangible results. But rarely we really sit down and think what are the intangible things that we need to resolve. And I suppose putting into observation or research, I do believe it will take time. It takes time to certainly foster that habit or the lifestyle or the culture, depending on the project or the organization that one works with or at.
Yeah, I mean, talking about taking time and understanding the context as well. I mean, the next thing I actually wanted to sort of ask you is, based on you worked in in Australia for a few years before going to Thailand. You also have experience in Malaysia as well. Did you feel that how do you feel about the markets, like when you're talking about design in Australian market, design in the Thai market from a UX perspective or design thinking perspective. Do you think that there are any, like just off the top of your head, any very clear differences in terms of the sort of the working culture or the client, the way clients work with you? Are there any things, any sort of cultural things that stand out to you, just off the top of your head?
Yeah, I think speaking from like working in Australia, it's a culture of believing and trust. We've both probably seen this a lot as well. It's about openness and really allowing individuals to flourish by learning through the hard bits and challenges. But in Asia, I think in Thailand, it's a lot more different, partly because I think one of the things that I wasn't used to moving here was the fact that it was very culture and status and hierarchy driven. Um, and it's not necessarily a bad thing because Thai people respect the elderlies. They respect people with uh, well educated, sort of stature, and because of that knowledge that they possess, there's some sort of wisdom instilled, and it was probably the way of how the culture was misplaced and probably mistook for granted, that people tend to take that sort of hierarchy stances and just say, no, it doesn't work that way because I'm way more experienced than you. No, it doesn't work that way because I've been years ahead, I see things that you don't. So you hardly get a culture of learning by doing, but rather you get a culture of learning just by observing what the culture has already been. Obviously, for me as a foreigner, wouldn't be able to come into that judgment, right? But I always said to my young teams of designers that whatever you do, right, you got to make sure that there's a balance, also sharing my years of experience and my work from Australia, and also working in Malaysia for a small bit of time, really just bring into the different values and culture and say how should we set things in motion, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not about the culture, the personal culture, but it really is about your work culture and your habit. Because if you possess the same energy, the spirit, and the same attitude in practicing what you really believe in for, say, design thinking, or if you're a user experience designer, then you make it to a point that it is all about advocating for the user. And you don't just simply throw away that value, right? Just because simply people sort of push you a little bit or sideways with you because of what you believe for. I've been through that journey. I've got people who came to me and say, Jason, that's not relevant at all. But you just got to move on with life, right? You just got to move on and really learn from there. And one of the key things that I've learned about from that lesson is that how do I make sure that in my next session, that rejection or that conversation, that negativity eventually become a more positive conversation? What can I do better? What can I say better? Is this something with how I presented my work? Is this something of how I really connect people together? So these are a lot of the questions, and obviously a personal culture that I need to have. And it's just the same that I say to my own team of designers as well. A culture is always a culture. It won't change. You can't change a culture, but if it's a personal culture and a work of yours, then you make it a habit to strive for the best, really.
Then, so I mean, having to come from a very different culture like Australia to Thailand, did it take you a while, to transition to the type of culture that you're talking about here? Was it something that was easy or difficult for you in terms of that transition?
I think it took about 2 years, 2 years or so. It was very difficult given, well, there's a mix of reasons. I think more than just work, right? I mean, about the pace of work, how people see things, from a seriousness point of view. Obviously, Thais are a lot more chiller, but that doesn't mean that they are slacking. It's not how I phrase it, but rather there are ways of how things can be done, sort of like, oh yeah, Jason, let's go and resolve one problem at a time. I'm personally not the kind that would say one problem at a time, but I do learn from it, because it's important to see how people in general, put that attention to one problem at a time. At the end of the day, you get one problem fixed rather than having 10 problems, but you're not actually fixing or solving anything, and you'll be scrambled. And really that took me 2 years to understand the culture, the work, really the respect for people. And certainly very, very difficult to sort of adjust away from working in Australia, whereby I did came across, I think, one of the design session with one of my juniors. I think I was sort of being too open about it. It eventually became a rejection for that individual. But only later I discovered that it it wasn't anyone's fault, but rather it's just the way of how we could clarify things better from a different work culture and different work experience point of view. So yeah, it was all good at the end. I just need to make it clear to my point. Why would I say so? Because of a different, but that doesn't mean I really sort of instill that negativity to that individual.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think moving to another country is always going to be a tough thing, right? And I think for you, I mean, you had to learn Thai. I'm sure it comes up in the day-to-day conversations. It may not be the vernacular that you're using. I don't know if it may be the vernacular that you're using in the business, right? Today or day-to-day conversations. But language is one big thing really. But even the work culture is also something that I think it's if you're going to any country, like even if somebody in Australia is going to Malaysia, they would have to learn Bahasa, right? They go to Cambodia or Vietnam or anywhere, or you're Singaporean going to Singaporean directly going to Thailand. Also, that would have been I think quite a big jump, and had to deal with a lot of these different things.
Well, given that it's a much more relaxed conversation, I think something that's not related to design, I think I really struggle most to have is actually good coffee.
Oh yes, Australian coffee. Yes.
I mean that's a very serious point. I like my coffee. Honestly, 2 years. I think if I could record either 2013 or 2014, for that straight 2 years, the coffee culture is not there. Definitely
now
not there.
Is it okay?
It is very good now. You get a lot of different influences, But yeah, those were the days really.
Took a while. So you
took a while.
You had to come first to sort of set the stage. Then the Melbourneian or the Sydney Australian coffee culture sort of followed you. They were like, oh, Jason's there, let me follow. But it does take. I mean, in Singapore also, I think there has been quite a lot of cafes. So now to get a good cuppa, I think not too bad. I mean, my taste buds, to be honest, are not as refined as an Australian coffee drinker. So I mean, to be honest, the main thing I can tell you if the difference between the coffee is maybe if it's burnt or whether if there's too much milk. I think those are the main things, or too hot or too cold. So I cannot tell you whether this bean is from a particular place or the way they cooked it is correct. So but I mean actually our behaviors are very, very unique to us, right? I feel. I mean, my taste for my liking for coffee over the past few years has changed. Like I went on tea for a while, and then I went back to coffee. And then I occasionally will go and get a cappuccino somewhere, but of course cost. I'm sure if Malaysia, maybe your 1 cup of traditional mamak coffee is maybe RM2. In Singapore here it's $1, right? But your 1 cup of Western Australian coffee is going to be like 5 or sometimes even 10 times the price, maybe, right? So we have to get our coffee fix sometimes. But actually that's a good point, because I think I'm sure as somebody who's considering to go to another country to work, especially as a designer like yourself, right? It's things like this that you need to consider. The language, the working culture within the company, how you're going to live your life in that new country as well, and even things like food, because somebody who isn't used to the food, let's say in Thailand, whether it's the sweetness or the sourness or the spiciness of the food, it may be a considerable factor for them, but say maybe or maybe not. But I guess for you, I guess coming on this point about the job and moving, do you and then we saw that there's a transition in terms of the type of food or the coffee that's there. If someone were to come and say, hey, there's a job in Thailand, whether they come from the Australian context or Malaysian context or even Singaporean context, I guess based on your own experience, did you feel that, I mean, I guess now if somebody would ask you, what do you think, now being there for a few years, a bit more experience in the space, a bit more objectivity, so there's a bit more experience from your end. Do you have any sort of one or two tips that you would sort of give to them, and also maybe what the job opportunities maybe, if someone were to say, hey, Jason, I'm keen to come to Thailand to work, can you let me know, what it may be like, what the job opportunities like as well. Yeah, so maybe just, maybe you can share a bit on that.
Yeah, I think first of all, I think one must do their homework, right? I mean, having the research sort of properly done, like the cost of living and the type of work that you wanted to really pursue ahead. Like if I would say Bangkok, because language is such an important part of everyday business, not just Thai language actually. I think Mandarin or Chinese, if you put it that way, and English, they are all essentially important because just by looking at the market right now, I think as much as skill is important, experience is important, I think character and what you're bringing to the company is so much more valuable to the recruiters or the hiring companies. And with the language advantage, given that we all live in Southeast Asia, that's really the best thing of all. You pick up different languages, and you're really able to put that into practice. So for a market, a multi-business kind of a market in Bangkok itself, everything is an opportunity. And I've said the same to my friends as well, whether or not you're in the food and beverage, the hospitality, you're in the insurance, you're in the SaaS startups, everything plays a part, everything plays a role. And there's a lot of demand for product-based roles, product managers, product owners, software engineers, UX designers, UI designers, and even UX researchers as well. A lot of these top gun companies really sort of started to move their headquarters into Bangkok, right? I mean, met a few great guys from Lazada, even from Shopee, as well as from Agoda as well. So you really see how they really bring in different cultures and values. So there's no one-way solution that says, oh, everything has to be a silicon-based kind of, the Facebook way of working or Google ways of working. Though that influence is important, but I think people eventually do value that culture of collaboration. So always believe in yourself that whenever you move to different countries, it's important that you carry the same confidence. I'm not talking about work confidence, right? I'm really talking about confidence that you are willing to learn and really to humble and unlearn, because that's essentially the key thing that I've the key things that I've picked up over the years, and I'm still learning today, really, from people, from culture, the executives that I work alongside with. You just got to understand their perspective and where they come from, and really sort of put yourself into that role and really demonstrate that value and the respect for them.
Yeah, I mean, even though we seem to have been talking about quite a few different things, right? I mean, like moving to another country or the type of work that you're doing, I think a lot of it actually comes back to the same thing, right? It's about you being a human and you being able to listen to people, through the observations, or to be able to willing to learn. I think I don't know whether it is it's a very, very good thing that you're mentioning this, because this is something that I've actually been feeling about the design industry. Like this, and this is just based on my observation. I'm not saying that the design industry is bad in any way, but there are some moments in time where I read something or I see something that's being said about the design industry, or I listen to somebody talk about things, right? I feel that there is that lack of what you talk about, that human aspect, the humility, and there's a lot of ego, so there's a lot of ego, like I'm right. do things my way. I have X number years of experience. I've been doing this very long for many years. So I think, what you mentioned here, I think it's something that I think, I think it separates that, just now what you spoke about, the aesthetics, the aesthetics of design, the UI of it. I think that skill of being human, understanding human beings, empathy, observing them and understanding what's the value, I think that's one very big step up that needs to be done when we move away from purely aesthetics. I think to define it as design, right? I would say, let's just call it the human element lah. I think the human element is something that needs to happen, for it to really be effective, from a business sense, organizational, cultural perspective, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think good. I mean, when you touched upon it, that was what I was thinking. Like, it's not, the design industry can be a little bit prideful, or so
it's good because the design that we probably seen 10 years ago, right, we would never imagine how it has changed a lot of businesses and the way we think, and certainly I would never thought, doing masters and having to sort of touch on a little bit about having some quality life in Swinburne, working in the design factory, and really be exposed to different projects and really work with different people would sort of pave way for today. I think it's really important. Like you've said, and we both agree that as young designers, design seekers, it's really important to really learn how to humble and really that human side of you, really to pick up many things. And I think it's important to make a lot of mistakes along the way, because it's a way for you to learn how to be better and to improve, right? Not saying you make silly mistakes, basic mistakes, but mistakes that you know that you can afford to bounce back and not having to make them again. And that's just sort of pave way for you really to learn about life better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that actually sums up I think today's podcast quite well. Which which is a good thing. I mean, I think what you mentioned, what we've always been speaking about, and I think just based on what I've known from from my experiences with each other and the journey, I think that's something that always has been a very key. I think there's a very, very key. I mean, I've always known you to be a very nice person. You were never, if there was anybody who was unreasonable, I'm always the one, most of the time in a lot of my interactions. But yeah, you've always been the one that's been very magnanimous, very, very nice. So I think that it clearly shows in the work that you're doing as well. Which is great, and I think. To anybody who's listening and to anybody who is, wants to learn about this, I think, it really needs a lot of effort. If you're a person who's, very, very, very stuck to the ways of doing things very specifically, and you're very against something, I think we all need to learn from this, and just to be a little bit more human. I think see the similarities and rather than the differences, and because actually, just to sort of go on this point, like recently, I don't know if you heard in Singapore, so we're recording this on the 18th of June, but when you're hearing this, a few weeks ago in Singapore, there was this particular article in the newspaper. So the newspaper is saying that top five essential jobs in during a pandemic, right? Or doctor, nurses, cleaners, delivery riders. But the top 5 the number one sort of non-essential jobs, right, is actually artists. So a lot of designers, a lot of artists were very angry, up in arms about it. But I think the thing is, those people who were able to think about it and really process it, they were actually fine. I felt a lot of them, a lot of the designers and a lot of creatives were like, yeah, actually, I think I in a pandemic, my job is not the essential. It's useful to there are. We're useful as a design community, as an artistic community for the world, to add value, to entertain people and so on and so forth. But just purely on the element of, the essentialness of it during a pandemic, whether you live or die, it's a different question. So there's definitely a very, very, very big topic about this, so, in the Singapore landscape, library's been talking about it for the past week or so. But yeah,
it's still trending.
It's still trending. I mean, still trending. And then one of very key thought leaders in Singapore wrote one very, very long article on the newspaper, and then the newspaper had to respond as well. So a lot of things has been that's the big news of the week in the design community. Like if you're not design community, actually most people don't will be like, oh, okay, sure, that's the list, and they have other issues with it. But the design community seem to be up in arms about it. So, but anyway, that's another topic for another day. But yeah, I mean, I think I would like to thank Jason for his time. Sharing with us his experiences in Thailand, and I think the points that he has made. I think it's very essential if we're looking at not just being a designer, but looking at bringing value to businesses through design. I think what we talked about today about being human, observing, empathy, humility. These are things that I'm still exercising those muscles on a day-to-day basis, and it's not easy. It's easy to read about it and learn and say, yeah, we have to have empathy, we need to observe, but it's not easy when it's you're on the field, you're doing projects that have 2 weeks turnaround or so and so forth. So yeah, definitely that's that. Anything that you wanted to add on before we end off today's session, Jason? Anything you wanted to sort of add on, last thoughts based on today's conversation so far?
No, not at all, really. I think, thank you, Nick. I couldn't thank you enough, really. I think I've certainly done a lot of podcasts with different people in the past as well, but I think what I really enjoy doing podcasts with different people, it's the fact that the conversation is always ever changing. And that's the fun bit with podcasts, and people really need to listen and be sort of seeking different knowledge from different methods or platforms. But really, I think just want to take this opportunity to just say, if whoever is interested to find out more than just design thinking, UX or CX, but if you're really interested in understanding the Thai market and even wanted to look for an opportunity, be happy to connect. As Nick have just mentioned, right? LinkedIn profile will be shared.
Yes.
Be really happy to sort of help connect through, and if there are any opportunities, really be able to help and really sort of to all designers or even product people, whoever's in the same field, if you're listening, we're all in doing the same thing. Really, it's just putting bits and pieces together to a bigger achievement.
Yeah.
So thank you, Nick. Really appreciate such quality time talking.
Yeah, I mean, I always find this podcast has, there's the educational factor, definitely, but it's also, I always feel it's really a good way to sort of touch base with different people. And I think what Jason really shared is very great. I mean, to have an opportunity, especially if in Singapore now that a lot of the businesses are also closing. We've seen some design agencies close as well. Some of them have left due to the pandemic. Some of them are closing down. They're shrinking in terms of the size. So yeah, if anybody is interested to move to Thailand, to maybe try out some of the opportunities, and you listen to this podcast and you thought, hey, actually Thailand doesn't seem to, you may have to wait a while before the borders open and the airports open, but maybe you can by the time you finish your interviews, you may have gotten a job in Thailand. But we I think please do connect with Jason. I mean, he's had like I said, more than 7 years experience both in Australia and in Thailand, and you add on his early experience in Malaysia, his experiences in Malaysia. There's a wealth of knowledge there. So if anybody wants to connect with Jason, I have his link in the description, and please do. So all right, I guess we'll end off there. Thanks very much, Jason, for your time. And thank you everybody for listening to the Everything Design Show podcast, and we'll see you at the next episode. Thank you. Bye.
See you, Nick. Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye, Jason.
See you around.
Bye.